In 1915, Black History Month started, half a century after when slavery was abolished in the United States. A Harvard-trained historian named Carter Godwin Woodson and the minister, Jesse Edward Moreland, founded what is now called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, for short, the ASALH. In 1926, the ASALH sponsored an event, what would now be called a National Black History Week. This week was at the same time as the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln, the man who abolished slavery, and Frederick Douglass, who, during the Civil War, conscripted black men to fight against the Confederacy. This resulted in schools and communities to organize more local events relating to celebrations for Black history, as well as various clubs, performances, and lectures on the topic of Black history. In 1954, mayors later started recognizing Black History Week and the Civil Rights Movement, which advocated for the abolishment of segregation. After this, Black History Week evolved into Black History Month in various college campuses. In 1976, President Gerald Ford recognized Black History Month. The month that the president chose was the same month when the original Black History Week was celebrated, February. But as you probably know, in the present, it is now celebrated in October. According to Samuel Whitbread Academy, this is when African chiefs and leaders would gather to settle their differences. But what was before?
In 1865, racial segregation began, officially with the adoption of the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery in the U.S. Early signs of this included schools for white and black people, and distinct military units for African Americans. Segregation officially ended around 50 years ago. However, there is a distinction between legal and actual segregation. While racial segregation is no longer legal, it still can exist in certain ways today. In many areas, people of different races often lived in separate neighborhoods, attended different schools, shopped at different stores, and didn't have equal access to the same services. Have you ever heard about segregation on public transportation? In Montgomery, Alabama, laws required black citizens to avoid sitting in the first 4 rows of buses, which were reserved for whites only. If all the seats only for whites were occupied, black passengers had to give up their seats to white riders. In 1955, civil rights activists started a bus boycott, calling for an end to discriminatory laws, but others didn't listen or hear. There were no black bus drivers at the time. While some white drivers were polite, many were openly insulting towards African Americans. Imagine, it was common to hear them yell racial slurs like black cows, niggers, and black monkeys. Even if the bus was full of black passengers, they weren't allowed to sit in the first 4 rows. If all the white designated seats were taken and more white passengers boarded, black passengers sitting further back had to give up their seats. Imagine if they refused, they were arrested.
Racial segregation in schools and discrimination against black people were systematic manifestations of inequality. The foundation of racial segregation in the schools was the U.S. Supreme Court's 1896 decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, which legalized the separate but equal principle. This decision allowed states, especially in the southern U.S., to enact laws requiring separate schools for white and black children. While these institutions were supposed to be equal in quality, in reality, schools for black children were significantly inferior. They lacked books, educational supplies, and qualified teachers. The school facilities were often old and unsuitable for use. While schools for white students received more funding and state support, black children were educated in conditions that severely limited their opportunities for quality education. Imagine you cannot go to normal school just because of your skin color. Black children deprived of proper education had fewer opportunities to secure good jobs and improve their social standing in the future. This in turn perpetuated cycles of poverty and social exclusion in the black community. Imagine people think you were different just because you were born. Celebrating Black History Month is not just about understanding and respecting people. It is a remembrance of the past that people have endured and continue to endure today, simply because of who they were born as. Simply because society chooses to consider some things normal and others not. Discrimination is not just about the law or anything else. It's about how many people, because of generally accepted rules, have done things to harm others. Imagine people being humiliated for who they are. Imagine people being discriminated against because of their appearance. Imagine children not having equal opportunities. Imagine not being accepted simply because of who you are.